10 Type 9s, the only German submarines which had the range to operate on the eastern seaboard of the United States. The submarines were ordered not to shoot at any targets, unless especially large, until they had reached their stations along the east coast of New York, Boston, Portland, Maine, and Norfolk, Virginia. On January the 12th, 1942, when all 9 U-boats were in position, Dönitz ordered that the offensive begin. The first victim was a British tanker just off Cape Cod. Within 4 weeks of the start of the offensive, the U-boats operating independently destroyed 50 merchant ships, nearly 300,000 tons. This spectacular success convinced Hitler to allow more U-boats to be transferred from the Arctic and Mediterranean. In addition, 20 Type 7s, modified for longer ranges, were now able to reach Canada. Eastern Atlantic U-boat operations slowly spread as far as the Caribbean. In February, the U-boats sank another 55 merchants, much of whose cargo was ultimately bound for Britain. Over 1 million tons of American shipping was destroyed before a single U-boat was sunk. With sinkings now running at 627,000 tons a month, the United States was forced to resort to desperate measures. Firstly, in a reversal of Lend-Lease, Great Britain sent the US Navy 10 corvettes and 24 armed trawlers, complete with their trained and experienced crews. Then, along the East Coast, a series of interlocking convoy operations was begun, and as resources allowed, these were continually expanded. For the first time, city blackouts were ordered by the federal government. Finally, the authorities took back 70 aircraft intended for the British Air Force and instead employed them on patrols along the coast. Week after week, all these improvements slowly took effect, and the number of sinkings began to fall. The Germans' second happy time was over. Dönitz knew that the U-boats' concentration in American waters had given a respite to British Atlantic convoys. U-boats operating along the US seaboard used up much of their supplies in just getting there, and could only remain on actual operations for 1/3 of the time they could operate in the western approaches. The U-boats still had to destroy 700,000 tons of shipping a month in order to defeat Britain, and Dönitz decided it was time to return to the eastern Atlantic and reform the wolf packs. Great Britain's transfer of armed trawlers and corvettes to the United States had reduced the number of escorts available for British convoys, especially in the eastern Atlantic. The weakness was only offset by improvements in existing escort ships and patrol aircraft. Powerful spotlights were fitted to long-range aircraft and greatly helped their ability to hunt U-boats, while at sea, the first forward-throwing, multi-barrel depth charge called a Hedgehog was proving highly successful. The Hedgehog removed the escort's main weakness in close-range combat and finally allowed the warship to fire depth charges while still maintaining ASDIC contact. By the summer of 1942, the number of Allied escort groups had increased substantially, and every month, yet more would plough the convoy routes. Because their ships and crews worked together voyage after voyage, they became highly effective teams, and the escort groups soon developed into supreme U-boat killers. By now, several small aircraft carriers had begun operating across the Atlantic, and their Martlets and Avengers were not only long-range eyes for the convoy escorts, but were also highly effective weapons in their own right. Despite all the improvements in convoy defense, the U-boat arm continued to go from strength to strength. After the second happy time, morale was the highest it had ever been. There had also been a series of logistical improvements. Special supply submarines called milch cows had been used on the American operations. These large submarines resupplied the U-boats in mid-ocean, enabling the U-boats to remain on station for even longer. There had also been important technical advances. Many U-boats were re-equipped with new and deadly acoustic torpedoes that homed in on merchant ship propellers. Metok's radar detectors were now fitted as standard and alerted the crew when they had been discovered by a convoy escort, giving them enough time to dive and escape. By the autumn of 1942, Allied air coverage along the Atlantic convoy routes had been considerably increased. But in the north, where the bulk of British imports crossed, a large air gap still remained, known to Allied sailors as the Black Pit. It was close to this air gap that Dönitz concentrated his U-boats, 30 in American waters and 40 in the western approaches, including several strong wolf packs. In early November 1942, SC-107, sailing from New York with 42 ships, was attacked in the largest convoy battle of the year. In just 4 days, 15 Allied merchant vessels were sunk, and altogether, the U-boats destroyed more than 80,000 tons. In the last 6 months of 1942, throughout the Atlantic and Caribbean, the U-boats had sunk a massive 575 Allied merchant ships. If the Germans could maintain this rate of destruction, the British war effort would collapse. The building of new merchant ships had fallen behind schedule. But most dangerous of all, Britain had just 3 months' supply of fuel oil left. For the Allies, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a crisis point. Allied commanders knew that it was their failure to sink large numbers of submarines that lay behind their constant reverses. They had made a concerted effort to destroy U-boats by bombing their yards and bases. But the U-boat bases had been equipped with huge reinforced concrete bunkers or pens. The pens were completely impervious to even the largest bombs. At sea, in 1942, the Allies had sunk 87 U-boats, higher than the year before, but averaging less than 8 a month. The Germans had built 3 for every 1 lost. And during the year, the number of operational submarines had risen from 91 to 212. For Admiral Dönitz, although 1942 had ended on a high note, he was not totally confident. Dönitz feared Allied technical improvements. He had learned of the powerful searchlights fitted to maritime aircraft and was beginning to suspect the existence of the new Allied 10-centimeter radar. To form wolf packs and intercept the convoys, U-boats needed their full